Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Man Behind the Mission. Marcus Webster wiped the rain from his jacket as he stepped into Haven House, the women's shelter he'd built from nothing over the past 8 years. The converted warehouse in South Boston hummed with life. Children's laughter from the playroom, the smell of dinner being prepared in the communal kitchen, the soft murmur of group therapy sessions in the back rooms. Mr. Webster, a young woman approached him, clutching a manila folder to her chest. Minnie Watts, one of their newest residents, had arrived 3 weeks ago with a broken arm and a restraining order that her ex-husband violated twice already. I got the job, the one at the bookstore downtown. Marcus broke into a genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes and transformed his usually serious face. Minnie, that's incredible. When do you start? Monday. They even said they could work around my therapy schedule. Tears welled in her eyes. I never thought, after everything, I never thought I'd feel normal again. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You were always normal, Minnie. You just needed a safe place to remember that. As she walked away, beaming, Marcus felt that familiar warmth in his chest. The reason he'd abandoned a lucrative corporate law career to do this work. His phone buzzed. A text from his wife, Darlene, working late again. Don't wait up. He frowned. That was the 4th time this week. Their marriage had been showing cracks for months now. Her distance, her coldness, the way she'd stopped asking about his day. But Marcus had been too consumed with the shelter's expansion plans to address it properly. They'd been married for 6 years, and somewhere along the way, they'd become strangers sharing a mortgage. Marcus, you got a minute? Lucia Manning, his shelter director and right-hand woman for the past 5 years, poked her head into his office. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back in its usual bun, but her expression was troubled. Always. What's wrong? She closed the door behind her. I got a weird call today. Some man asking specific questions about our funding, our donor list, whether we kept records of which women stayed here and when. Marcus's jaw tightened. What did you tell him? Nothing. I hung up. But Marcus, it felt wrong. Like he was fishing for information. She paused. Has Darlene been asking about the shelter lately? Darlene. He was caught off guard. She barely acknowledges what I do here. What? Lucia shifted uncomfortably. I saw her last week. Downtown, having lunch with a man. They looked intimate. And when I mentioned it to you that evening, you said she was at a conference in New York. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he kept his face neutral, a skill he'd learned from years of listening to traumatized women share their stories without showing pity, only strength. You're sure it was her? Positive. I almost went over to say hello, but something stopped me. The way they were sitting, the way he touched her hand. Lucia met his eyes. I'm sorry, Marcus. I should have told you sooner. After she left, Marcus sat in the darkness of his office, staring at his wedding photo on the desk. Darlene's smile looked genuine in that picture, her hand on his chest, his arm around her waist. When had it all gone wrong? His phone buzzed again. Need to talk when you get home. Important. Marcus called an Uber. The rain had intensified, and he wasn't in the mood to drive. As he locked up Haven House, he waved to the overnight security guard, young Sellers, a former Marine who'd taken the job after his daughter had spent time at the shelter. Everything okay, boss? Young called out. You look like you've got the weight of the world on you. Marcus forced a smile. Just tired, Young. See you tomorrow. Get some rest. We got this. The black sedan pulled up, and Marcus slid in the back seat, water dripping from his coat. The driver, a man in his early 30s with a shaved head and a scar running down his left cheek, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Address confirmed. Beacon Hill, right? That's right. Marcus leaned his head back, closing his eyes. He needed to prepare himself for whatever conversation Darlene wanted to have. Part of him wondered if she was going to ask for a divorce. Part of him wondered if he'd even fight it. Chapter 2. The Revelation. The car had been moving for about 10 minutes when Marcus noticed they weren't taking the usual route. He sat up straighter, checking the GPS on his phone. They were heading toward the waterfront, away from Beacon Hill. Excuse me, Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. This isn't the right way. The driver's eyes met his in the mirror. I know. Marcus's hand moved toward the door handle, but the driver spoke quickly, urgently. Mr. Webster, I need you to listen very carefully. My name is Jesse Duncan. Your wife hired me to kill you tonight. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Marcus's entire body tensed, his mind racing through options. Jump from the moving car, try to overpower the driver, call 911. But something in Jesse's voice made him hesitate. I'm not going to hurt you, Jesse continued, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Just hear me out. Please, pull over. Now, Marcus's voice was steel. Jesse did, parking in an empty lot near the harbor. He killed the engine and turned around, his face illuminated by the streetlights. 2 months ago, your wife contacted me through an associate. She wanted you dead. Made it look like a mugging gone wrong. She offered $50,000. Why are you telling me this? Jesse reached into the glove compartment slowly, deliberately. Marcus tensed, ready to fight, but Jesse pulled out a manila folder instead. Because I do my homework on every job. I look into who I'm being asked to kill. And when I looked into you, I found Haven House. I found a list of women you've helped over the past 8 years. He paused, his voice cracking slightly. My sister was one of them. Marcus's breath caught. Who? Rosie Duncan. She went by her married name, Rosie McCoy, when she was with you. 4 years ago, her husband nearly killed her. She was in the ICU for 2 weeks. When she got out, she had nowhere to go. You took her in. You helped her get back on her feet, helped her through therapy, helped her find a job. She talks about you like you're a saint. Marcus remembered. Rosie McCoy, broken ribs, punctured lung, cigarette burns on her arms. She'd been so fragile when she arrived, flinching at every sound. Now, if Jesse was right, she was alive and doing well enough to tell her brother about Haven House. So you're what? Having a crisis of conscience? Marcus asked, still wary. I'm a killer, Mr. Webster. I'm not a good man, but I have lines I don't cross. Jesse handed him the folder. My sister is alive because of you. She has a daughter now, my niece Emma. She's 3 years old. Rosie showed me pictures of you at Emma's baptism. You went. You celebrated with her. Marcus opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photos, him and Darlene together, but not alone. Darlene with another man, kissing him in a parking garage. Darlene and the same man entering a hotel. Financial records showing large cash withdrawals from their joint account. Phone records with hundreds of calls to an unlisted number. Who is he? Marcus asked, his voice hollow. Martin Delaney, real estate developer. Also, your wife's lover for the past 18 months. Jesse pulled out another document. But that's not why she wants you dead. Marcus looked up sharply. Delaney is developing a luxury condo complex. The problem? It's being built on the site of a former industrial plant. The soil is contaminated, lead, arsenic, you name it. They buried the environmental reports, bribed the inspectors. People are going to live there, Mr. Webster. Children are going to play in those yards. What does this have to do with me? Haven House just purchased the lot next door for your expansion, right? You're doing your due diligence, environmental surveys, the works. When your team tests that soil, they're going to find the contamination. It'll spread to the investigation of Delaney's site. The whole project will collapse. He'll face criminal charges. And your wife, she's not just his lover. She's his business partner. She invested your money from your parents' estate that you inherited. $2 million. Marcus felt like the ground had disappeared beneath him. She forged my signature, among other things. Jesse flipped to another page. She's been planning this for months. Once you're dead, she inherits everything. No investigation into the soil. Delaney's project goes forward. They both get rich. You have 60 seconds to decide, Jesse said, his voice hard. Police or me? I can make this disappear, her Delaney, all of it. Or you can go to the cops with this evidence and hope they move fast enough before Delaney realizes you know. Marcus stared at the evidence in his hands, his mind working through every angle. The police would mean investigations, lawyers, trials that could take years. Darlene and Delaney had money and connections. They could flee. They could destroy evidence. And even if they were caught, they might walk with light sentences. But there was a third option, one Jesse hadn't mentioned. I need more than 60 seconds, Marcus said quietly. And I need to know everything you know about them. Jesse studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Get in the front seat. We have a lot to discuss. Chapter 3, The Web of Deceit. They drove to a dingy motel on the outskirts of the city, one of those places that rented by the hour and didn't ask questions. Jesse had a room there, his base of operations, he called it. The walls were covered with surveillance photos, timelines, and maps. You've been watching them, Marcus said, taking in the scope of the operation. For 6 weeks. Your wife is meticulous. Oh, I give her that. But everyone makes mistakes. Jesse pointed to a photo of Darlene meeting with a heavy-set man in a suit. Recognize him? No. Edgar Gates. City councilman. He's the one who pushed through the permits for Delaney's project, despite the environmental concerns. Darlene's been paying him off $50,000 a month. Marcus sank into a chair, the full picture coming into focus. How many people are involved in this? At least 5 that I can confirm. Gates, Delaney, your wife, and 2 inspectors who signed off on fake reports, Jason Huff and Miguel Bridges. There might be more. Jesse pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. You want to know the worst part? This isn't Delaney's first time. He pulled the same scam in New Jersey 3 years ago. Kids got sick from the contaminated soil. Nothing was ever proven, but the lawsuits bankrupted the families trying to fight him. Marcus took the offered glass and downed it in one swallow. The burn in his throat was nothing compared to the rage building in his chest. Darlene hadn't just betrayed him. She'd been willing to let children get poisoned for profit. The same woman who'd once claimed to support his work at Haven House. I need to understand why you're really helping me, Marcus said. It's not just about your sister. Jesse refilled both glasses. You're right. It's about the kind of man I see in that folder. He gestured to the evidence. You dedicated your life to helping people who couldn't help themselves. My sister was suicidal when she came to you. You sat with her through panic attacks. You testified at her custody hearing. You helped her become whole again. He met Marcus's eyes. I've killed 12 people in my career, Mr. Webster. All of them were bad people, criminals, abusers, people who had it coming. I tell myself that asleep at night. But you're genuinely good. And I'm not going to be the one who takes that out of the world. So what now? Now you tell me what you want to do. Because here's the reality. If we go to the police, Darlene and Delaney have enough money to drag this out for years. They'll hire the best lawyers, discredit evidence, maybe even discredit you. And while that's happening, that condo project, it'll be finished and sold. Families will move in. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked parking lot. His entire life had been about doing things the right way, through the system, through the law. But the system had failed so many of the women he'd helped. How many restraining orders had been violated? How many times had the police showed up too late? There's a third option, Marcus said slowly. We don't kill them, and we don't wait for the police. I'm listening. Marcus turned back to Jesse, and for the first time that night, he smiled, cold, calculating, nothing like the warm smile he'd given Minnie earlier. We destroy them. Completely. We make them face exactly what they've done, and we make sure they can never hurt anyone again. Ow! You said Delaney did this before in New Jersey. Those families, they never got justice. No. He settled out of court, paid them off for silence. Find them. Find every family, every victim. I want their stories, their evidence, everything. Marcus's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. Darlene forged my signature on those investments. That's fraud. Gates took bribes. That's corruption. Those inspectors falsified reports, criminal negligence. We don't just go after them for trying to kill me. We go after everything. Jesse was nodding now, seeing it. We build a case so airtight they can't escape. And we make it public. All of it. The media, the FBI, everyone. They won't be able to buy their way out if the whole world is watching. Marcus pulled out his phone. But first, I need to play the part. Darlene's expecting me home. She wants to talk. Are you crazy? She hired me to kill you tonight. When you walk through that door, she's expecting you to do your job. When I walk in alive, she'll panic. And panic people make mistakes. Marcus looked at Jesse. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Jesse studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. You've got bigger balls than half the men I've worked with. All right, but I'm going to be outside that house. Anything goes wrong, I'm coming in. Fair enough. Marcus gathered the folder. One more thing. Your sister? Rosie. I want to talk to her. Why? Because if we're going to do this right, I need to know she's safe. If this goes sideways, Delaney and Darlene might come after her to get to you. We need to protect everyone we care about. Jesse's expression softened slightly. I'll set up. But Marcus? Once we start this, there's no going back. You understand that. Marcus thought of all the women at Haven House. He thought of the children who would play in poisoned yards if he didn't act. He thought of Darlene, who'd shared his bed while plotting his murder. I'm already past the point of no return, he said quietly. Let's finish this. Chapter 4. The Performance. Marcus arrived home at 11:47 p.m. The brownstone in Beacon Hill was dark except for a single light in the bedroom. His hands were steady as he unlocked the door, but his heart hammered against his ribs. Jesse was parked half a block away, watching. Darlene was sitting on the edge of their bed, still dressed in her work clothes, a designer suit that cost more than most of his shelter residents saw in a month. She looked up as he entered, and Marcus saw genuine surprise flash across her face. You're late, she said carefully. Traffic. He set down his briefcase, watching her every micro-expression. You said you wanted to talk? She stood, smoothing her skirt. I've been thinking about us, about where we're heading. And where's that? Marcus kept his voice neutral, curious. I think we need some time apart, Marcus. You're so consumed with the shelter, and I have my own career to think about. We've grown in different directions. He almost laughed. She couldn't even wait for confirmation of his death. She was already setting up the divorce narrative, probably planning to file papers and make his murder look like a tragic coincidence. I see. He moved to the closet, deliberately turning his back on her. A test. If she was planning something immediate, this was her chance. When were you thinking? Soon. Maybe next week. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Just preliminary conversations. She was lying smoothly, but Marcus could hear the tension underneath. It doesn't have to be ugly. No, of course not. He pulled off his tie. Does this have anything to do with Martin Delaney? The name landed like a grenade. Darlene's face went white. What? Who told you? I saw the pictures, Darlene. You and him. I've known for weeks. Another lie, but a useful one. Is that why you want the divorce? You're leaving me for him. She recovered quickly. He had to give her that. I didn't want you to find out like this. Yes, Martin and I have been seeing each other. I'm sorry, Marcus. I never meant to hurt you. But you did. He turned to face her fully, and he let all his rage, all his pain, show on his face. Let her think she'd wounded him. Let her think he was the victim. How long? Does it matter? It matters to me. She sighed, playing the part of the regretful adulteress. 1.5 years. I met him at a fundraiser. You were working late, as always. He made me feel seen, Marcus, like I mattered. And the $2 million for my inheritance? Does he make you feel seen when you're investing my money in his projects? Her eyes went wide. She hadn't expected that. Marcus, I can explain. Can you explain hiring someone to kill me? Dead silence. The color drained from her face completely. You're being paranoid. Jesse Duncan sends his regards. Marcus pulled out his phone and played a recording. Jesse's voice, clear as day. Your wife hired me to kill you tonight. Darlene stumbled backward, hitting the dresser. You don't understand. It's not what you think. Marcus, please. Tell me the truth. All of it. Right now. He stepped toward her, and she flinched. Good. And maybe I don't go to the police tonight. She was breathing hard, trapped, calculating her options. Finally, she spoke. It was Martin's idea. The contamination, you were going to discover it with your soil tests. Everything would have fallen apart. He said this was the only way. The only way to what? Get rich from poisoning children. We didn't know about the contamination at first. Her voice rose, defensive. Not until the permits were already approved. By then, we'd invested everything. If we backed out, we'd lose millions. Martin said we could mitigate it, make it safe enough. Safe enough. Marcus felt his control slipping. There's no safe level of lead contamination for children, Darlene. You know that. I know you know that because we had dinner with a pediatrician last year who spent an hour talking about it. She wrapped her arms around herself. What do you want, Marcus? Money? I'll give you whatever you want. Just don't go to the police. Please. This was the moment. Marcus could see it in her eyes. She'd throw Delaney under the bus to save herself. She'd cooperate, give evidence, turn on everyone. But that wasn't enough. He needed to know everything. I want names. Everyone involved. Everyone who knew about the contamination, everyone who took bribes, everyone who helped you plan this. He pulled out his phone again. And I want it recorded. Right now. If I do this, you'll let me go? If you do this, I won't call the police tonight. That's all I'm promising. It was enough. Darlene started talking, and Marcus recorded every word. Chapter 5, Gathering Allies. By 3 a.m., Marcus had a full confession. Darlene had named Edgar Gates, the city councilman, Jason Huff and Miguel Bridges, the inspectors. She'd detailed the payments, the timeline, the whole conspiracy. But she'd also revealed something crucial. There was a sixth person involved. Who? Marcus demanded. Randolph Carpenter. He's a lawyer. He helped set up the shell companies to hide the money trail. He's also the one who recommended Jesse Duncan to Martin. Marcus's blood ran cold. A lawyer recommended an assassin? Carpenter's not just a lawyer. He's connected to organized crime. Martin used him for all his shady deals. Darlene was crying now, mascara running down her face. Please, Marcus. I've told you everything. Just let me go. You're not going anywhere. He called Jesse. Get in here. Bring zip ties. Jesse was through the door in 2 minutes, and together they secured Darlene to a chair in the study. She screamed threats, promises, apologies. Marcus ignored all of it. We need to move fast, Jesse said once they were alone in the kitchen. Once Delaney realizes you're alive and Darlene's missing, he'll go to ground. Not if he thinks everything's still going according to plan. Marcus was thinking 3 moves ahead now. Darlene was supposed to call him after I was dead, right? According to the messages I intercepted, yes. Then that's what she's going to do. Marcus pulled out Darlene's phone. He'd taken it while securing her. You're good with voices? Jesse smiled grimly. I've done some impersonations in my time. What do you need? Call Delaney. Tell him it's done. Tell him I'm dead. Buy us time. While Jesse worked on perfecting Darlene's speech patterns, Marcus made another call to Lucia Manning. Marcus? It's 3 in the morning. Lucia, I need you to trust me. Something's happened, and I need you to get all the women and children out of Haven House for the next 48 hours. Can you do that? Her voice sharpened immediately. Are they in danger? Not if we move fast, but I need everyone somewhere safe. No questions asked, no trail. Can you make that happen? We have protocols for this. Give me 4 hours. You've got 3. Next, Marcus called his lawyer, not Randolph Carpenter, but his personal attorney, a woman named Leanne Dunham, who'd helped him set up Haven House's nonprofit status. She answered on the 4th ring, groggy. Marcus, Leanne, I need you to draft an emergency restraining order and file it first thing this morning. My wife attempted to have me killed last night. I have evidence. I also need you to freeze all our joint accounts and secure my personal assets. Silence. Then, I'll be at your house in 30 minutes. While he waited, Marcus reviewed the evidence Jesse had compiled. Financial records, photographs, phone logs, Darlene's confession. It was damning, but it wasn't complete. They needed more to bring down the entire network. Jesse ended the call with Delaney. He bought it. Expects to meet Darlene tomorrow at noon to celebrate. Perfect. That's our window. Marcus spread out a map of the city. Here's what we're going to do. The plan was audacious, probably illegal in a dozen ways, but it would work. Marcus outlined each step while Jesse listened, occasionally nodding or suggesting refinements. By the time Leanne Dunham arrived, they had a roadmap to destruction. Leanne took one look at Darlene tied up in the study and turned to Marcus. I'm going to pretend I didn't see that. Tell me everything, and make it fast. Marcus did. When he finished, Leanne was pale but determined. This is beyond anything I've handled before. We need federal investigators. Marcus. FBI, EPA, probably the DA's office. I know. But if we go to them now, Delaney and Carpenter will lawyer up and the whole thing will get buried in bureaucracy. We need to create a situation where they can't hide. He handed her a USB drive. This is everything, all the evidence, all the recordings. I need you to hold on to it. If anything happens to me, it goes to the media and the FBI simultaneously. What are you planning? I'm planning to make them confess in front of witnesses. Lots of witnesses. Leon studied him for a long moment. The Marcus Webster I knew 8 years ago wouldn't have done something like this. The Marcus Webster you knew 8 years ago hadn't been marked for death by his own wife. He met her eyes. They were going to poison children, Leanne, for profit. I can't let that happen. She nodded slowly. All right, I'm in. But we do this smart. No vigilante justice. We get them on record, we get them caught, and we let the system handle it. Agreed. Marcus shook her hand. Now get out of here before you're implicated any further. After she left, Marcus returned to the study where Darlene sat, exhausted and defeated. I'm going to ask you some questions about Carpenter, and you're going to answer every single one. She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. You've changed, Marcus. You used to be so idealistic. What happened to the man who believed in redemption? He learned that some people don't want redemption, Marcus said coldly. They just want to win. Now start talking. Chapter 6, The Trap. The next morning, Marcus walked into Haven House looking like he hadn't slept, which was true. Lucia met him at the door, her face creased with worry. Everyone's out. I sent them to our sister shelter in Providence. But Marcus, people are asking questions. Tell them it's a precaution related to a domestic situation. They'll understand. He squeezed her shoulder. You did good, Lucia. Now I need one more favor. Name it. I need you to call a press conference for tomorrow afternoon. Tell them Haven House has a major announcement about the shelter expansion and community development. Her eyes widened. You're going public with this? I'm going to make sure there are so many eyes on this situation that no one can make it disappear. He pulled out his phone and showed her the plan. Can you get media there? Marcus, this is insane. Probably. Will you help me anyway? She smiled grimly. Those women you helped, you gave them their lives back. Including me. I was resident number 3, remember? Before I became your director. Whatever you need, I'm in. He'd forgotten that Lucia herself had once been a resident. She'd come to Haven House 7 years ago after her husband put her in the hospital for the last time. She'd rebuilt herself, gone back to school for social work, and become indispensable to the shelter's operations. Thank you, Marcus said quietly. While Lucia worked on press arrangements, Marcus met Jesse at a warehouse in Southie. Jesse had been busy too. He tracked down Randolph Carpenter's office, his home, his routine. More importantly, he found something interesting. Carpenter's got a problem, Jesse said, pulling up surveillance footage on his laptop. He likes to gamble, and he's bad at it. Owes money to some very dangerous people. How much? 300 grand to a loan shark connected to the Russo family. Marcus's mind word. That's leverage. If we can offer him a way out. You want to flip him against Delaney? Lawyers keep records. Carpenter probably has documentation of everything. All the shell companies, all the payments, everything Delaney doesn't want found. If we can convince him to cooperate. Jesse shook his head admiringly. You're not just out for revenge. You're out for total annihilation. They tried to kill me to cover up poisoning children. They don't deserve half measures. Marcus pulled out his phone. Set up a meeting with Carpenter. Tell him you're a business associate of Delaney's and you have a proposition. While Jesse arranged that, Marcus drove to meet with someone else. Rosie Duncan, Jesse's sister. She'd agreed to meet him at a coffee shop in Cambridge, away from her usual haunts. Rosie was in her early 30s, with kind eyes and her brother's same sharp features. When she saw Marcus, she stood and hugged him immediately. Mr. Webster, Jesse told me what's happening. I can't believe, she pulled back, tears in her eyes. You saved my life. And now someone tried to take yours. Rosie, I need to ask you something difficult. Are you willing to testify about your time at Haven House? About what we do there, why it matters? Of course. But why? Marcus explained the plan, the press conference, the public exposure, the need to show the community what was at stake. If Delaney's project goes forward, Other women like you won't have safe places to go. The contamination will spread. More children will get sick. I need people to understand what we're fighting for." She didn't hesitate. "I'll do it. I'll tell them everything. There might be blowback, media attention. Are you prepared for that?" Rosie straightened her shoulders. 4 years ago, I was so broken I wanted to die. You taught me to be strong again. Let me use that strength for something that matters." That afternoon, Marcus met with Randolph Carpenter in a parking garage, neutral ground that Jesse had swept for surveillance. Carpenter was a thin man in his 50s, impeccably dressed, but with the haggard look of someone carrying too many secrets. "I don't know you," Carpenter said immediately, "and I don't meet with strangers. You know my wife, Darlene Webster. You helped her set up shell companies to hide money from the condo project with Martin Delaney." Marcus didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You also recommended Jesse Duncan to kill me." Carpenter went rigid. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Save it. I have recordings. I have evidence. And in about 36 hours, I'm going to hand all of it to the FBI and the media simultaneously." Marcus stepped closer. "Unless you cooperate, you're bluffing." "Am I? Because here's what's going to happen if I go public with what I have. Delaney goes down for fraud, environmental crimes, and attempted murder. Your law license gets revoked. You go to prison. And that $300,000 you owe to Russo's people, you'll never be able to pay it. They don't take IOUs from inmates." Carpenter's face went white. "How do you? I make it my business to know everything about the people trying to destroy me." Marcus pulled out an envelope. "Here's my offer. You testify against Delaney. You provide all the documentation of his crimes. You cooperate fully with investigators. In exchange, I arrange for your gambling debt to be paid off, and I work with the DA to get you immunity from prosecution." "That's impossible. I don't have that kind of money." "I do. My parents' estate. The $2 million Darlene stole from me? I'm getting it back. And I'm willing to use part of it to pay your debt if it means bringing down everyone involved in this conspiracy." Carpenter was sweating now. "Why would you do that?" "Because I want Delaney to pay for everything he's done. And I want to make sure he can't hurt anyone else. You're a worm, Carpenter, but you're not the head of the snake. Help me cut it off." For a long moment, Carpenter said nothing. Then, "What exactly do you need?" Marcus smiled. "Everything. Every document. Every email. Every shady deal Delaney's ever done. And I need you to be ready to testify tomorrow at a press conference." "Tomorrow? That's insane." "Tomorrow, where the deal's off and I go to the FBI tonight." Marcus's voice was iron. "Your choice." Carpenter closed his eyes, defeated. "Fine. I'll do it." Chapter 7. Checkmate. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. at Haven House. By noon, the shelter's main room was packed with media. Local news crews, investigative reporters, even a producer from a national network that had been covering contamination scandals nationwide. Marcus stood backstage with Lucia, Jesse, who'd cleaned up surprisingly well in a suit, Rosie, and Carpenter. Leon Dunham was there too, ready to handle legal questions. "Last chance to back out," Jesse murmured. "Not a chance." Marcus checked his watch. "Is everything in place?" "FBI is standing by. They've reviewed the evidence you sent anonymously this morning. They're ready to move as soon as you give a signal." Jesse handed him a small device, a panic button that would alert federal agents waiting outside. "Edgar Gates is in custody. They grabbed him an hour ago based on the recordings. He's already cooperating. And Delaney? He thinks he's meeting Darlene at his office right now. Instead, he's going to be met by agents with arrest warrants." Marcus nodded. Everything was converging. "Then let's do this." He walked out to the podium, and the room fell silent. Cameras flashed. Microphones clustered around him like hungry mouths. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began. "My name is Marcus Webster, and 8 years ago, I founded Haven House to provide shelter and support for women escaping domestic violence. In that time, we've helped over 300 women and their children rebuild their lives." He paused, letting that number sink in. "Yesterday, I learned that my wife hired an assassin to kill me." The room erupted in shouting questions. Marcus held up a hand. "I learned this because the assassin in question, a man named Jesse Duncan, chose not to go through with it." "Why?" because his sister was one the women Haven House helped save. She was number 47. Jesse stepped forward, and cameras swiveled to capture him. My name is Jesse Duncan. I'm a contract killer. Marcus Webster's wife, Darlene Webster, hired me through an intermediary to murder her husband and make it look like a mugging. She offered me $50,000. The room went ballistic. Marcus continued, his voice cutting through the chaos. My wife wanted me dead because Haven House's expansion was going to expose environmental contamination at a nearby condo development. That development is being built by Martin Delaney, who is also my wife's lover and business partner. The contamination includes lead and arsenic at levels that pose severe health risks, especially to children. He nodded to Lucia, who brought out poster boards covered in soil test results, medical studies, and photographs of the site. Delaney and my wife, along with City Councilman Edgar Gates and Inspectors Jason Huff and Miguel Bridges, conspired to hide this contamination so the project could move forward. They bribed officials, falsified reports, and when they realized I might discover the truth, they decided to kill me. Randolph Carpenter stepped forward now, visibly shaking. My name is Randolph Carpenter. I'm an attorney. I helped Martin Delaney set up shell companies to hide the money trail and avoid accountability. I also connected him with Jesse Duncan. Everything Marcus Webster is saying is true. I have documents proving all of it. Marcus pulled out a USB drive and held it up. This contains financial records, phone recordings, surveillance footage, and a full confession from my wife detailing the entire conspiracy. I'm providing copies to the FBI, the EPA, the state DA's office, and all of you. Leanne Dunham stepped forward with boxes of evidence packets for the media. But this isn't just about me, Marcus continued, his voice rising with passion. This is about what happens when greed and corruption are allowed to flourish. Martin Delaney did this same thing in New Jersey 3 years ago. Children got sick. Families were devastated. And he got away with it because he had money and connections. He gestured to Rosie, who stepped to the microphone. My name is Rosie Duncan. 4 years ago, my husband beat me nearly to death. I had nowhere to go, no hope, no future. Marcus Webster gave me all three. Haven House saved my life. Her voice cracked with emotion. Places like this matter. The work Marcus does matters. And people like Martin Delaney and Darlene Webster try to destroy it all just to make money. The emotional impact was visible. Reporters were wiping their eyes. Cameras captured every moment. Marcus delivered the final blow. I'm calling on the FBI to immediately investigate Martin Delaney, my wife Darlene Webster, Edgar Gates, Jason Huff, Miguel Bridges, and Randolph Carpenter for fraud, corruption, environmental crimes, and conspiracy to commit murder. I'm also calling on the city to halt the condo project immediately and conduct a full environmental assessment. On cue, his phone buzzed. He checked it and looked up with satisfaction. I've just been informed that the FBI has taken Martin Delaney into custody. Edgar Gates was arrested earlier today. Warrants are being served for Huff and Bridges as we speak. The room exploded with questions, but Marcus was done. He stepped back from the podium and let Leanne field the legal questions while he, Jesse, and Rosie slipped out the back. Chapter 8. Reckoning. The fallout was immediate and devastating. By evening, every major news outlet in the country was running the story. Shelter founder nearly murdered in contamination cover-up screamed the headlines. Darlene's confession, played on national television, became the most-watched clip of the week. Martin Delaney's mugshot went viral. Marcus watched from his lawyer's office as the dominoes fell. Edgar Gates, desperate to save himself, testified about every bribe he'd ever taken. Jason Huff and Miguel Bridges were fired and arrested within hours. The condo project was shut down, the site cordoned off for environmental remediation. But the real victory came 3 days later. The FBI's investigation, fueled by Carpenter's documentation and Darlene's confession, uncovered not just the Boston project, but 3 other similar schemes Delaney had run in different cities. Environmental regulators descended on all the sites. Families who'd been sickened in New Jersey came forward with renewed lawsuits, armed with the proof they'd never had before. Delaney's entire empire collapsed within a week. Marcus received a call from the lead FBI investigator, a woman named Jody Tate. Mr. Webster, I wanted to update you personally. We've charged Delaney with 17 counts including fraud, environmental crimes, bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder. Your wife faces similar charges. Carpenter's cooperation earned him a reduced sentence, 5 years with possibility of parole. Gates is looking at 10 to 15. Huff and Bridges will likely get 3 to 5 each. And Delaney? He's going away for the rest of his life. The prosecutor's pushing for 40 years minimum. She paused. You should know, we've also identified 63 families across 4 states who were affected by his contaminated developments. They're filing a class action suit. Between criminal restitution and civil damages, Delaney's going to be bankrupted. Marcus felt a grim satisfaction. What about my wife? The DA's offering her a deal, 25 years in exchange for full testimony against Delaney. Her lawyers advising her to take it. 25 years. Darlene would be in her 60s when she got out. If she got out, there's one more thing, Agent Tate said. Jesse Duncan. Technically, he confessed to being a contract killer. We should prosecute. Marcus's jaw tightened. He saved my life. He stopped a murder and helped expose a massive conspiracy. I know, and between you and me, I don't want to prosecute him either. But he admitted to 12 murders on national television. Self-defense and defense of others, Marcus said quickly. He was protecting me from imminent harm. His confession was made under duress, and he's cooperating fully with authorities. Agent Tate was quiet for a moment. Your lawyer already called me with that exact argument. It's thin, Mr. Webster. Then make it work. Please. He could have killed me and collected his money. Instead, he did the right thing. Doesn't that count for something? I'll talk to the DA. No promises. After she hung up, Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhausted. Leanne Dunham walked in with coffee. You look like hell, she said. I feel like hell. He took the coffee gratefully. Is it over? The legal part? Far from it. This is going to be in court for years. But the immediate danger? Yes, it's over. Delaney and Darlene can't hurt you or anyone else anymore. Marcus thought of all the families in New Jersey, all the children who'd gotten sick, all the women at Haven House who needed a safe place. It's not enough. They should pay more. They will. Trust me, prison is going to be especially hard on people like them. Leanne sat across from him. But you need to think about yourself now. About healing. About moving forward. How am I supposed to move forward? My wife tried to kill me. I've been living a lie for years. You focus on what's real. Haven House is real. The women you've helped are real. The good you've done is real. She leaned forward. Marcus, you're a hero. Do you understand that? You exposed a massive conspiracy, saved countless lives, and brought down some truly evil people. That's real. He wanted to believe her, but all he felt was tired. Chapter 9, New Foundations. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the finished expansion of Haven House. The lot next door had been properly tested, cleaned, and built into a new wing with 20 additional beds, a medical clinic, a daycare center, and offices for therapists and social workers. The opening ceremony was packed. Rosie was there with her daughter Emma, who ran giggling through the new playroom. Lucia stood beside him, beaming with pride. Young Sellers, the security guard, had been promoted to head of security for both buildings. And Jesse Duncan was there, dressed in a suit, looking uncomfortable but present. The DA had cut him a deal after all. 10 years probation, mandatory therapy, and 500 hours of community service. He'd chosen to do that service at Haven House, teaching women's self-defense classes. It turned out that a reformed hitman was excellent at helping women feel safe and powerful. Speech time, Lucia whispered. Marcus stepped to the microphone, looking out at the crowd, reporters, donors, residents, community members, even some of the FBI agents who'd worked the case. 4 months ago, I learned that the person I trusted most wanted me dead, he began. I learned that people I'd never met were willing to poison children for profit. I learned that the system I believed in could be corrupted and broken. He paused, finding Rosie's eyes in the crowd, then Jesse's. But I also learned that there are people who will do the right thing even when it costs them everything. I learned that one person's courage can inspire dozens more. I learned that when you bring truth into the light, darkness has nowhere to hide. He gestured to the building around him. This expansion represents more than just beds and services. It represents every woman who refused to give up, every person who chose justice over convenience, every voice that said no more. His voice grew stronger. Martin Delaney is in prison. Darlene Webster is in prison. Edgar Gates, Jason Huff, Miguel Bridges, all of them are facing the consequences of their actions. But more importantly, 63 families who were hurt by Delaney's greed are getting compensation and justice. For contaminated sites are being cleaned up, and new laws are being passed to prevent this from ever happening again. The crowd erupted in applause. None of that would have happened if one person, Jesse Duncan, hadn't chosen to be brave. If Rosie Duncan hadn't shared her story. If Lucia Manning hadn't helped protect our residents. If Randolph Carpenter hadn't chosen to do the right thing in the end. Marcus looked directly at Jesse. We all have the capacity for both good and evil. What matters is which one we choose to act on. After the ceremony, Marcus found Jesse standing alone in the new courtyard, looking up at the building. You okay? Marcus asked. Jesse shrugged. Never thought I'd be teaching women how to fight back against men like I used to be. You're not that person anymore, aren't I? I've killed 12 people, Marcus. Doing community service doesn't erase that. No, it doesn't. But it's a start. Marcus put a hand on Jesse's shoulder. My sister, Rosie, she told me you visit Emma every week. You read to her, play with her, make her laugh. She's my niece. She's also proof that you're capable of love, of being gentle, of choosing life instead of death. Marcus met his eyes. You saved me, Jesse. Not just my physical life, but you reminded me that even in the darkest situations, people can surprise you. Jesse's eyes were suspiciously bright. Your wife really did a number on you. Yes, she did. But you know what? I survived, and I'm stronger for it. Marcus looked at the building full of women who'd survived their own hells. We all are. Later that evening, Marcus sat alone in his new apartment. He'd sold the brownstone, unable to live in a place with so many painful memories. He poured himself a drink and pulled out his phone. There was a message from Agent Tate. Delaney's sentenced today. 45 years, no parole. Thought you'd want to know. Marcus smiled. Justice. Another message from Lucia. 6 new women arrived today. They're scared but hopeful. Thank you for making this possible. Purpose. And finally, a message from Jesse. Emma wants you to come to her 4th birthday party next month. Fair warning. There'll be a bounce house, and I'm required to participate. Family. Not by blood, but by choice. Marcus set down his phone and looked at the framed photo on his desk. The entire Haven House staff and residents, taken at the expansion opening. Dozens of faces, dozens of stories of survival and strength. He'd been betrayed by the person who was supposed to love him most. He'd nearly been murdered. He'd had to make impossible choices and walk through fire to get justice. But he'd won, not just survived, won. And tomorrow, he'd get up and do it all again. Because that's what survivors did. They got up. They kept fighting. They built new foundations on the ruins of what tried to destroy them. Marcus raised his glass to the photo. To new beginnings. In the end, that's what revenge really was, not just destroying your enemies, but building something better in their place. And Marcus Webster had built something that would outlast any darkness. Haven House would stand. The women would be safe. The children would grow up free from poison. That was victory. That was justice. That was enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Dean Harrington had built his life on 3 principles: loyalty, protection, and precision. At 38, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen combat in 2 theaters and survived by being smarter, faster, and more ruthlessly determined than his enemies. His scarred hands, earned defusing IEDs in Afghanistan, now worked as a demolitions consultant for construction companies across Nevada. But those same hands had once been capable of taking apart more than just buildings. The house in Henderson was Dean's fortress, a modest two-story with reinforced security that most visitors assumed was simple paranoia. In reality, every camera, every motion sensor, every redundant lock system had been installed by a man who understood that threats could come from anywhere, at any time. His wife, Cassandra Morales, had seemed like the perfect partner when they met 5 years ago. Beautiful, charming, and from a prominent local family that owned several successful restaurants throughout Las Vegas. Her father, Ramon Mercado, was a respected businessman who had built his empire from nothing. Her mother, Beatrice Moyer, came from old Vegas money and brought social connections that opened doors for Ramon's expanding business. Dean's son from his first marriage, 12-year-old Nicholas Cooper Harrington, had been the light of his life since his ex-wife died in a car accident 4 years earlier. The boy was intelligent, curious, and had inherited Dean's mechanical aptitude along with his late mother's gentle nature. When Dean married Cassandra, he believed he was giving Nicholas the stable family environment every child deserved. That belief was about to be shattered in the most devastating way possible. The first warning sign came during a family dinner at the Mercado house 3 months ago. Nicholas had accidentally knocked over a glass of wine while reaching for bread, and Cassandra's reaction had been swift and disproportionate. She grabbed the boy's wrist hard enough to leave marks, hissing that he needed to learn some goddamn manners before he embarrassed the family again. Dean had intervened immediately, but what bothered him more than Cassandra's overreaction was the approving nods from her parents. Ramon had muttered something about discipline starting early, while Beatrice had suggested that some children need firmer handling. The second incident occurred a month later when Nicholas brought home a B+ on a math test instead of his usual A. Cassandra had confiscated his Nintendo Switch for 2 weeks and made him write, "I will not disappoint my family," 500 times. When Dean questioned the punishment severity, Cassandra had accused him of undermining her authority and threatened to reconsider whether this family arrangement was working. But it was the third incident, the one Dean hadn't witnessed directly, that would change everything. Nicholas had been staying with the Mercado family for the weekend, while Dean attended a conference in Denver. According to the boy's quiet explanation after Dean returned, he'd been given $5 to buy ice cream from a truck in the neighborhood. Somehow, the money had fallen out of his pocket during the walk back to the house. What happened next would fuel Dean's nightmares and justify every brutal action that followed. Cassandra had flown into a rage, screaming that Nicholas was careless and worthless just like his dead mother. When the boy started crying, she'd grabbed her expensive perfume, Chanel No. 5, the bottle Dean had bought her for their anniversary, and sprayed it directly into Nicholas's eyes while he was trapped in the corner of the kitchen. The chemical burn had been immediate and agonizing. Nicholas had screamed, clawing at his face while Cassandra stood over him, continuing to spray the perfume. Her mother, Beatrice, had watched from the doorway and laughed. If he's blind now, maybe he won't see he's a burden too. Ramon had emerged from his study to see what the commotion was about. Upon seeing Nicholas writhing on the floor, clutching his burning eyes, he'd chuckled and said, "Well, at least he smells better now." None of them had bothered to flush the boy's eyes with water. They'd left him on the kitchen floor, sobbing and partially blinded, while they returned to their evening routine as if nothing had happened. Nicholas had eventually stumbled to the bathroom and tried to rinse his eyes himself, but the damage was done. When Dean picked him up Sunday evening, the boy's eyes were still red and swollen, his face marked with chemical burns that would leave permanent scars. "What happened to your face, son?" Dean had asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the rage building in his chest. Nicholas had looked away, clearly terrified. I fell down some stairs. It's okay, Dad. Just clumsy." But Dean Harrington hadn't survived 3 combat deployments by accepting obvious lies. That night, after Nicholas was asleep, Dean had reviewed the security footage from the cameras he'd secretly installed throughout the Mercado house during a previous visit. Cameras so small and sophisticated that the family had never noticed them. What he saw on those recordings transformed Dean from a loving husband and father into something far more dangerous. The 15 minutes of footage showing his son's torture would be burned into his memory forever. But more importantly, they would serve as evidence for the systematic destruction he was about to unleash. As Dean sat in his home office, watching Cassandra sleep peacefully in their bed through the monitor, he began making a list. Not a grocery list or a honey-do list, but a catalog of every person who had participated in or enabled Nicholas's abuse. Every person who would pay for their cruelty with interest compounded daily until the debt was settled in full. Cassandra Morales Harrington, wife, abuser, primary target. Beatrice Moyer, mother-in-law, enabler, witness to torture. Ramon Mercado, father-in-law, enabler, witness to torture. But Dean's investigation was just beginning. Over the next week, using skills learned in military intelligence, he discovered that this hadn't been an isolated incident. The security footage revealed a pattern of psychological and physical abuse spanning months, carefully hidden from Dean, but witnessed and encouraged by Cassandra's parents. More disturbing was the discovery that Cassandra was involved with another man, Louis Pratt, a local casino manager who had been visiting the Mercado house regularly when Dean was traveling for work. The recording showed Louis not only witnessing Nicholas's abuse, but actively participating in it, once forcing the boy to stand in a corner for 4 hours because he'd made too much noise playing in the backyard. Dean's list grew longer, his plans more detailed, his commitment to justice more absolute. He had learned in Afghanistan that some enemies couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be reformed, and couldn't be allowed to continue existing in the same world as innocent people. The war was about to come home, and Dean Harrington had never lost a war. Chapter 2. The Discovery. Dean's investigation into his family's betrayal took on the methodical precision of a military operation. Every day, while maintaining the facade of a loving husband, he gathered evidence, documented crimes, and built psychological profiles of his targets. His home office became a command center, filled with printed photographs, financial records, and detailed timelines that would have impressed his old Army intelligence unit. The deeper he dug, the more horrifying the truth became. The security footage revealed that Cassandra's abuse of Nicholas wasn't limited to physical violence. She'd been systematically destroying the boy's self-esteem through psychological warfare that would have impressed professional interrogators. She'd been throwing away Nicholas's homework, then screaming at him for being too stupid to remember assignments. She'd been moving his belongings around the house, then punishing him for losing things and being irresponsible. Most cruelly, she'd been intercepting cards and letters from Nicholas's maternal grandparents, ensuring that the boy believed his dead mother's family had forgotten about him entirely. The perfume incident had been the culmination of months of calculated torture, designed to break a 12-year-old's spirit completely. But Cassandra wasn't acting alone. The recording showed Louis Pratt as an active participant in the abuse, often suggesting new ways to toughen up Nicholas. During one particularly disturbing session, Louis had forced the boy to stand on one foot for 2 hours while holding heavy books, claiming it would teach him balance and discipline. The kid's too soft, Louis had told Cassandra during one of their secret meetings. His father's made him weak. We need to break him down completely before we can build him back up into something useful. Cassandra had laughed, running her fingers through Louis's hair. Don't worry, baby. Once Dean's out of the picture, we'll have all the time we need to properly raise the boy. Or we could just send him to military school and be done with it. Dean had watched this conversation from his office, his hands clenched so tightly around his coffee mug that the ceramic cracked. The casual way they discussed destroying his son's life, the complete lack of empathy or remorse, the certainty that they would eventually eliminate Dean himself. It all confirmed what he'd already concluded. These weren't people who could be reasoned with or reformed. They were predators who viewed Nicholas as prey and Dean as an obstacle to be removed. The investigation also revealed the true nature of the Mercado family dynamic. Ramon and Beatrice weren't just enabling Cassandra's abuse, they were orchestrating it. Financial records showed that they'd been systematically draining Dean's accounts through Cassandra's access, funneling money into offshore accounts that would fund their retirement to Costa Rica. More damning was the discovery that they'd taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Dean without his knowledge, forging his signature on documents that named Cassandra as the sole beneficiary. The policy had been purchased just 3 months ago, right around the time Nicholas's abuse had escalated. Dean cross-referenced the insurance purchase with other evidence and discovered a pattern that chilled him to the bone. The Mercado family had done this before. Beatrice's first husband had died in a tragic accident 15 years ago, leaving her a wealthy widow. Ramon's business partner had died in a robbery gone wrong 7 years ago, conveniently right before a major expansion that would have diluted Ramon's ownership stake. The perfume attack on Nicholas hadn't been an isolated incident of abuse. It had been a test. They were conditioning themselves to violence, building up to something far worse. The life insurance policy suggested that Dean himself was the ultimate target, with Nicholas either discarded or molded into a broken, obedient tool. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They had underestimated who Dean Harrington really was beneath the facade of suburban domesticity. That evening, Dean attended a family dinner at the Mercado house, playing his role perfectly while studying his enemies with cold precision. Nicholas sat quietly beside him, still wearing sunglasses to hide the lasting damage to his eyes from the perfume attack. The boy had become withdrawn and fearful, jumping at sudden noises and flinching whenever Cassandra came near. "Nicholas looks much better," Beatrice commented with false concern. "Children heal so quickly from their little accidents." Dean smiled pleasantly. "Yes, they're remarkably resilient. Though I did have him checked by a specialist, just to be safe. Dr. Nathaniel Miller at the eye clinic downtown. He was quite interested in the, unusual nature of the chemical burns." The room went silent for a moment. Ramon cleared his throat. "Chemical burns? I thought you said he fell downstairs." "That's what Nicholas told me initially," Dean replied, his voice still pleasant but carrying undertones that made everyone except Nicholas unconsciously shift in their seats. But Dr. Miller explained that the pattern of injury was consistent with direct contact with aerosolized perfume. Very specific damage, apparently. Hard to mistake for anything else. Cassandra's fork clattered against her plate. "What are you implying, Dean?" Dean's smile widened, and for just a moment, the mask slipped enough to reveal something predatory underneath. "I'm not implying anything, sweetheart. I'm simply sharing what the medical professional told me." Dr. Miller was so intrigued that he documented everything thoroughly. For his research files, you understand. Lewis Pratt, who had been invited to dinner as a family friend, spoke up from across the table. "Maybe the kid got into Cassandra's perfume himself. Children do stupid things when they're unsupervised." Dean turned his attention to Lewis, and the casino manager immediately regretted speaking. "That's an interesting theory, Lewis. Though I can't imagine why Nicholas would spray expensive perfume directly into his own eyes. Can you think of any reason why a child would do that to himself?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Everyone at the table understood that they were no longer having a pleasant family dinner. They were being interrogated by someone who had already found all the answers. "People sometimes hurt themselves when they're crying out for attention," Beatrice suggested weakly. Dean nodded thoughtfully. "Another interesting theory, though that would suggest Nicholas has been feeling neglected or abused somehow. Has anyone noticed signs that he might be unhappy in our care?" Nicholas remained silent, but Dean saw the boy's hands trembling slightly. The courage it must have taken to endure months of torture without breaking completely filled Dean with both pride and rage. "Of course not," Ramon said quickly. "Nicholas is a wonderful boy. We all love him very much." "I'm sure you do," Dean agreed, "which is why I'm certain you'll all want to cooperate with the investigation." Cassandra's face went pale. "Investigation?" Dean's smile became genuinely warm for the first time all evening. "Oh yes, sweetheart. Dr. Miller was legally obligated to report suspected child abuse to the authorities. Detective Alfred Marquez will be conducting interviews with everyone who's had recent contact with Nicholas. Standard procedure, really. Nothing to worry about if everyone's been telling the truth." The lie came easily, delivered with the casual confidence of a man who had spent years deceiving enemies in life-or-death situations. There was no Dr. Miller, no Detective Marquez, no official investigation. But his targets didn't know that, and their guilty consciences would do most of Dean's work for him. As the evening progressed, Dean watched his enemies squirm, each one clearly calculating how much the others knew and whether they could be trusted to maintain the conspiracy of silence. By the time he and Nicholas left for home, Dean was satisfied that the psychological pressure was already beginning to fracture their unity. Phase 1 of his operation was complete. Now it was time to begin the real work. Chapter 3. The Preparation. Dean's transformation from suburban father to tactical operative happened gradually, like a snake shedding its skin. During the day, he maintained his routine, dropping Nicholas at school, attending work meetings, playing the role of concerned husband investigating his son's accident. But his nights belonged to preparation, planning, and the meticulous construction of a trap that would destroy his enemies completely. The basement of his house became a workshop that would have made his old Special Forces unit proud. Dean had always been mechanically gifted, but now he applied those skills toward creating tools of psychological warfare. Hidden cameras smaller than coins, listening devices that could be concealed in everyday objects, recording equipment that could capture conversations from 3 rooms away. But Dean's most important preparation was psychological. He studied his targets like a predator, learning the habits of prey, identifying weaknesses, mapping relationships, understanding the dynamics that held their criminal conspiracy together. Cassandra was vain and insecure, dependent on her parents' approval but resentful of their control. She craved validation and luxury, using her relationship with Lewis as both rebellion against her parents and escape from her marriage to Dean. Her weakness was her need to be the center of attention. She couldn't resist bragging about her schemes or documenting her success on social media. Lewis Pratt was a mid-level casino manager with delusions of grandeur and a gambling addiction that kept him perpetually in debt. He viewed his relationship with Cassandra as a path to financial security through her family's wealth, but he was also skimming money from the casino to fund his poker habit. His weakness was greed. He would risk everything for the promise of easy money. Ramon Mercado was the architect of the family's criminal activities, but his success had made him overconfident and careless. He believed his money and connections made him untouchable, which led him to leave digital trails that a more cautious criminal would have eliminated. His weakness was pride. He couldn't resist taking credit for his cleverness. Beatrice Moyer was the most dangerous of the group because she was the most intelligent, but she was also the most dependent on maintaining her social status. Her cruelty toward Nicholas came from a pathological need to control and dominate others, but she was terrified of public humiliation. Her weakness was reputation. She would sacrifice anyone to protect her standing in Las Vegas society. Understanding these weaknesses allowed Dean to craft individual strategies for each target, but his master plan required them to turn against each other. He began by planting seeds of suspicion and paranoia, using their own criminal tendencies against them. First, he created fake evidence suggesting that Lewis was skimming more money from the casino than he actually was, then ensured that information reached Ramon through carefully orchestrated accidents and overheard conversations. Ramon, who viewed Lewis as a useful tool but not a trusted partner, began investigating his daughter's boyfriend with the paranoid intensity of a man protecting his empire. Simultaneously, Dean fed Cassandra subtle hints that her parents were planning to cut her out of their escape plan to Costa Rica. He hacked into Beatrice's email account and discovered drafts of messages discussing the need to simplify our arrangements and eliminate unnecessary complications. By forwarding edited versions of these emails to Cassandra's private account, Dean made her believe that she was considered expendable by her own family. The psychological pressure began to show results within days. Cassandra became increasingly clingy and demanding with Lewis, seeking reassurance that their relationship was solid. Lewis, unaware that Ramon was investigating him, continued his casino skimming while planning increasingly elaborate ways to access Dean's assets. Ramon and Beatrice, convinced that their partners were unreliable, began making contingency plans that excluded both Cassandra and Lewis. But Dean's masterstroke was the evidence he planted, suggesting that each member of the conspiracy was secretly cooperating with law enforcement. He created fake FBI files, fabricated wiretap transcripts, and forged immunity agreements that made it appear as though everyone was betraying everyone else to save themselves. The beauty of the plan was that none of it had to be true. It only had to be believable enough to trigger their guilty consciences and criminal paranoia. People who were genuinely innocent would have questioned the evidence or sought verification. But people who were genuinely guilty would see betrayal everywhere and react accordingly. The perfume attack on Nicholas became the catalyst that accelerated everything. Dean used the incident to justify installing security cameras throughout the house, ostensibly to protect his son from future accidents. In reality, the cameras allowed him to monitor Cassandra's increasing erratic behavior and record her conversations with Lewis about their plans to eliminate Dean. "He's becoming suspicious," Cassandra told Lewis during one late-night phone call that Dean recorded from 3 different angles. "The way he looks at me now, it's like he knows something. Maybe we should move up our timeline," Lewis suggested. "The insurance policy is active. All we need is the right kind of accident." "What about the boy?" Lewis's pause was telling. "Military school, like we discussed. Or maybe he could have an accident too. Kids are fragile." Dean listened to this conversation from his basement command center, his face expressionless as they casually discussed murdering both him and Nicholas. But inside, something final and irrevocable clicked into place. These weren't people who deserved mercy or second chances. They were cancer cells that needed to be cut out completely. The next morning, Dean began the final phase of his preparation. He emptied several bank accounts and converted the money to untraceable cryptocurrency. He created new identities for himself and Nicholas, complete with passports and documentation that would allow them to disappear completely if necessary. He established secure communication channels with contacts from his military days, men who understood that some problems couldn't be solved through legal channels. Most importantly, he began teaching Nicholas skills that no 12-year-old should need to know: how to recognize surveillance, how to send coded messages, how to disappear quickly if their safety was compromised. The boy was still traumatized from his abuse, but Dean's training gave him purpose and confidence that therapy alone couldn't provide. "Dad," Nicholas asked one evening as they practiced lock-picking in the basement, "are we going to hurt the people who hurt me?" Dean looked at his son, scarred, damaged, but still trusting him completely, and made a decision that would define both their futures. "Yes, son. We're going to make sure they never hurt anyone ever again." Nicholas nodded solemnly, accepting this truth with the same quiet courage he'd shown throughout his ordeal. "Good, because I don't think they'll stop unless someone makes them stop." At 12 years old, Nicholas Cooper Harrington understood something that most adults never learned. Some people chose to be evil, and evil only stopped when it was forced to stop. Dean's preparation was complete. The war could begin. Chapter 4. The First Strike. Dean's opening move came during what appeared to be a routine family barbecue at the Mercado house. The entire conspiracy was present, Cassandra and Lewis playing the role of secret lovers while maintaining public pretense, Ramon and Beatrice hosting with their usual combination of charm and barely concealed contempt for their guests. Nicholas stayed close to Dean's side, his sunglasses hiding the lasting damage from the perfume attack. What none of them knew was that Dean had spent the previous week transforming their gathering into a carefully orchestrated trap. The first phase began when Lewis excused himself to the bathroom. Dean had anticipated this. The casino manager's weak bladder was a well-documented vulnerability that could be exploited with surgical precision. While Lewis was gone, Dean slipped a small device into his jacket pocket, a GPS tracker coupled with a voice recorder that would monitor the man's movements and conversations for the next 72 hours. "Lewis seems nervous today," Dean commented to Ramon as they stood by the grill. "Is everything all right at the casino?" Ramon's eyes flickered with suspicion, exactly the reaction Dean had been cultivating for weeks. "Why do you ask?" "Just noticed he keeps checking his phone. Hope there aren't any problems with his employment. I know how important job security is, especially for someone with his expenses." The comment was loaded with implications. Dean had made sure Ramon knew about Lewis's gambling debts, his skimming from the casino, and his increasingly desperate financial situation. Every word was calculated to increase Ramon's distrust of his daughter's boyfriend. When Lewis returned from the bathroom, Dean was ready with the second phase. He approached the younger man with a friendly smile and a beer, positioning himself so that their conversation couldn't be overheard by the others. "Lewis, I need to ask you something privately, Dean said, his voice carrying just enough concern to make Lewis immediately defensive. Have you noticed anything strange about Cassandra lately? Any unusual behavior or secretive activities? Lewis's face went pale. What do you mean? I found some interesting documents in her purse yesterday. Email printouts, bank statements, things that suggest she might be planning something without my knowledge. Dean pulled out his phone and showed Lewis a fabricated screenshot of a bank transfer. $50,000 moved to an account in the Cayman Islands. Do you know anything about this? The transfer was completely fictional, but Lewis didn't know that. What he didn't know was that Cassandra had access to Dean's accounts and had been discussing their plans to steal his money. Seeing evidence that she was already moving assets without including him triggered every paranoid instinct Lewis possessed. I don't know anything about that, Lewis stammered. Dean nodded sympathetically. I was hoping you'd say that, because if Cassandra is planning to disappear with my money, I'd hate to think you were involved. That would be conspiracy to commit theft, fraud, potentially even attempted murder, given the life insurance situation. Lewis's face went from pale to gray. Life insurance? You didn't know about the policy she took out on me? $3 million, with her as the sole beneficiary. Purchased right around the time Nicholas started having his accidents. Dean's voice remained conversational, but his eyes never left Lewis's face. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but the timing is interesting. The implication hung between them like a loaded gun. Lewis realized that he'd been played by Cassandra and her family, used as a tool in a scheme that could destroy his life completely. But what he didn't realize was that Dean was playing him too, feeding him just enough truth to make the lies believable. What are you going to do? Lewis whispered. Dean smiled, and Lewis saw something in that expression that made him want to run. I'm going to protect my son and myself. The question is, are you going to help me, or are you going to go down with them? The offer of alliance was irresistible to a man who suddenly realized he was expendable to his supposed partners. Dean had calculated Lewis's response perfectly. Greed and self-preservation would override any loyalty to Cassandra. What do you want me to do? Keep acting normal. Don't let them know we've talked. But start documenting everything, conversations, plans, any evidence of their intentions toward Nicholas or me. I'll need proof of their criminal conspiracy if I'm going to protect myself legally. Lewis nodded eagerly, not realizing that he was agreeing to incriminate himself and his co-conspirators. Dean had just recruited his enemy as an unwitting agent, turning Lewis's survival instincts into a weapon against the entire group. The third phase began when Dean rejoined the family gathering. He made a point of being especially affectionate with Cassandra, praising her cooking and thanking her parents for their wonderful support during Nicholas's recovery. But his performance was designed to achieve specific psychological effects. I've been thinking, Dean announced to the group as they sat around the patio table. Nicholas has been through such a traumatic experience with his accident. Maybe we should plan a special family vacation to help him recover. Somewhere tropical, maybe Costa Rica. The reaction was immediate and telling. Ramon choked on his beer, Beatrice's fork clattered against her plate, and Cassandra's face went white. Their planned escape destination had just been suggested as a family vacation, which could only mean one thing. Dean knew about their plans. Costa Rica? Beatrice managed to ask. It's supposed to be beautiful this time of year, Dean continued cheerfully. Perfect for a family looking to start over, maybe even relocate permanently if they found the right opportunity. The words were chosen with surgical precision. Every member of the conspiracy was now wondering how much Dean knew and whether their communications had been compromised. The paranoia that Dean had been cultivating for weeks exploded into full-blown panic. That sounds expensive, Ramon said carefully. Dean's smile widened. Oh, don't worry about the cost. I've been moving some investments around, liquidating assets. I want to make sure our family has everything we need for whatever the future brings. The implication was clear. Dean was also moving money offshore, which meant he either knew about their plans and was trying to beat them to it, or he was planning something of his own that required liquid assets. Either possibility terrified them. As the evening wound down, Dean made sure to hug each member of the conspiracy warmly, whispering private comments that increased their individual paranoia. To Cassandra, I know we haven't been as close lately, but I want you to know that I'll always protect what's mine. To Ramon, thank you for always treating Nicholas like your own grandson. Some people aren't as understanding about stepchildren. To Beatrice, I'm so glad Nicholas has recovered from his accident. It would have been terrible if there had been permanent damage. Each comment was designed to suggest that Dean knew more than he was saying, that he was aware of their individual roles in Nicholas's abuse, and that he was preparing to take action. By the time Dean and Nicholas left for home, the conspiracy was fracturing under the weight of suspicion and fear. Dean had successfully turned them against each other without firing a shot or making an overt threat. Now he just had to wait for them to destroy themselves. But he wouldn't wait long. The GPS tracker in Lewis's pocket was already transmitting data. The voice recorder was capturing panic conversations between the conspirators, and Dean's master plan was entering its most lethal phase. The first strike had been psychological warfare. The next strike would be far more personal. Chapter 5. The Trap Springs. The recording device Dean had planted on Lewis proved more valuable than expected. Within 24 hours, it captured a series of conversations that provided the final evidence Dean needed to justify what came next. The first conversation occurred between Lewis and Cassandra at 2:17 a.m., when Lewis called in a panic after Dean's revelations at the barbecue. He knows Cassandra. He knows about the money, the insurance policy, everything. Calm down. Cassandra hissed into the phone. You're paranoid. Dean doesn't know anything. Then explain the Costa Rica comment. Explain how he knew about the life insurance. Your husband isn't stupid, and we've been treating him like he is. There was a long pause before Cassandra responded. Maybe it's time to accelerate our timeline. What are you talking about? The accident. Instead of waiting for the perfect opportunity, we create one. This weekend, when Dean takes Nicholas camping like he always does. A tragic fire, carbon monoxide poisoning, something that eliminates both problems at once. Lewis's sharp intake of breath was audible on the recording. You're talking about murdering a child. I'm talking about removing obstacles to our future, Cassandra corrected coldly. Nicholas is damaged goods anyway. Those burns on his face aren't healing properly. He'll never be normal. The casual way she discussed murdering her stepson crystallized everything Dean had suspected about his wife's true nature. But the recording got worse. The second conversation occurred the next morning between Cassandra and her mother, Beatrice. Lewis is getting cold feet about the boy, Cassandra reported. He thinks we should just focus on Dean and send Nicholas to boarding school. Lewis doesn't understand that witnesses are liabilities, Beatrice replied with the cold calculation of a professional criminal. The boy has already seen too much, knows too much. He could cause problems later. So we proceed as planned. We proceed as planned. A tragic camping accident that claims both father and son. Very sad, but these things happen. The insurance money will ease our grief considerably. The third and most damning conversation occurred between Ramon and an unknown male voice that evening. The arrangements are in place, the stranger said. Carbon monoxide canisters, delayed release mechanism, remote detonation if necessary. It will look like a faulty camp stove. Very common cause of camping fatalities. And there won't be any evidence linking back to us? None. The equipment will be completely destroyed in the explosion. Your son-in-law and his boy will just be another tragic statistic. Dean listened to these recordings in his basement command center, his face expressionless as his family calmly planned his murder and that of his son. The evidence was now incontrovertible. They weren't just abusive opportunists. They were calculating killers who viewed Nicholas as nothing more than a witness to be eliminated. The camping trip they referenced was real. Dean took Nicholas into the mountains every few months, partly for bonding time, but mostly to maintain skills that his military background demanded. The isolated campsite they used was accessible only by hiking trail, with no cell phone coverage and no witnesses for miles in any direction. It would be the perfect place for an accident. But Dean had no intention of being a victim. Instead, he was going to turn their murder plot into the instrument of their own destruction. That evening, Dean sat Nicholas down for a conversation that no father should ever have to have with his 12-year-old son. Nicholas, I need to tell you something very serious. The people who hurt you are planning to hurt us both, permanently. Do you understand what that means? Nicholas nodded solemnly. Despite his age, the boy had seen enough evil to understand that some threats were existential. They want to kill us. Yes. And tomorrow night, when we go camping, they're going to try. But we're not going to let that happen. Dean pulled out a detailed topographical map of the camping area, marked with positions, escape routes, and tactical considerations that would have impressed his old Special Forces unit. Here's what we're going to do. The next evening, Dean and Nicholas loaded their camping gear into the truck and drove toward the mountains, just like they had a dozen times before. But this time, their packs contained more than sleeping bags and trail mix. Dean had equipped them both with night vision goggles, encrypted communications devices, and emergency supplies that could sustain them for a week in the wilderness. More importantly, Dean had spent the afternoon rigging the campsite with his own surprises, motion sensors, hidden cameras, and several devices that would turn the hunters into the hunted. They arrived at the trailhead at sunset and hiked the 3 miles to their usual camping spot, a clearing beside a small stream that provided water and concealment. Dean set up their tent exactly where he always did, but he and Nicholas wouldn't be sleeping in it. Instead, they established a secondary position 200 meters away, hidden in dense undergrowth with clear sight lines to the campsite. From this concealed position, they could monitor anyone who approached their sleeping location. The attack came at 3:17 a.m., just as Dean had predicted. 3 men in dark clothing approached the campsite with military precision, carrying equipment that included the carbon monoxide canisters Ramon had arranged. They moved like professionals, confirming Dean's suspicion that the Mercado family had hired actual killers rather than attempt the murders themselves. Dean watched through night vision as the assassins placed their devices around the tent, setting up what would appear to be a tragic accident caused by a faulty camp stove. The carbon monoxide would kill silently, leaving bodies that appear to have died peacefully in their sleep. But the tent was empty except for sleeping bags stuffed with camping gear. Dean and Nicholas were safely hidden, documenting everything through multiple camera angles while preparing for Phase 2 of their counterattack. When the assassins activated their murder device and retreated to a safe distance to ensure the accident was successful, Dean triggered his own surprise. The campsite exploded in a brilliant flash of light and sound as his flashbang grenades detonated simultaneously, disorienting the killers and temporarily blinding them. In the chaos that followed, Dean moved like the predator he'd been trained to be. He eliminated the first assassin with a silenced pistol before the man could recover from the disorientation. The second killer managed to draw his weapon, but couldn't see clearly enough to aim. Dean's knife found his throat before he could fire a shot. The third assassin proved more resilient, managing to take cover behind a tree while calling for backup on his radio. But Dean had anticipated this contingency. He triggered a second set of devices that created a landslide on the narrow trail, cutting off any possibility of escape or reinforcement. "Drop your weapon and put your hands where I can see them," Dean called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had given similar commands in combat zones. The assassin responded by firing blindly in Dean's direction, which was exactly the response Dean had hoped for. Return fire was now justified by any legal standard. Dean's single shot took the man's center mass, dropping him instantly. In less than 10 minutes, 3 professional killers had been neutralized with surgical precision, leaving Dean and Nicholas unharmed and in possession of evidence that would destroy the conspiracy completely. But Dean wasn't finished. The real punishment was just beginning. Using the assassin's own radio equipment, Dean contacted Ramon directly. The terror in his father-in-law's voice when he realized the murder plot had failed was almost satisfying enough to end the operation immediately. "This is Dean," he said calmly into the radio. "Your boys won't be coming home." The silence lasted nearly 30 seconds before Ramon found his voice. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't," Dean agreed. "Just like you don't know anything about carbon monoxide canisters, life insurance policies, or spraying perfume in children's eyes. But here's what you do know, Ramon. I'm coming home now, and I'm bringing evidence that will put your entire family in prison for the rest of your lives." Dean ended the transmission and began preparing for the final phase of his operation. The camping trip had been a trap, but not for him. Now it was time to spring the larger trap he'd been building for months. By morning, Ramon Mercado, Beatriz Moyer, Cassandra Morales Harrington, and Louis Pratt would understand what it meant to declare war on Dean Harrington. They would also understand why he never lost. Chapter 6. The Reckoning begins. Dean and Nicholas returned from their camping trip at dawn, their truck pulling into the driveway of a house that would soon become a battleground. The three dead assassins remained in the mountains, their bodies positioned to suggest a violent confrontation between rival criminal organizations. Dean's military training had taught him that sometimes the best cover story was the one that law enforcement wanted to believe. But the physical cleanup was secondary to the psychological warfare Dean was about to unleash. The camping attack had been Ramon's desperation play, a final attempt to eliminate witnesses and claim the insurance money. Its failure meant the conspiracy was now trapped, with nowhere to run and no choice but to face the consequences of their actions. Dean's first stop was the bank, where he withdrew the remaining funds from all accounts that Cassandra could access. The financial rug was now pulled out from under the conspiracy, eliminating their ability to hire additional killers or fund an escape to Costa Rica. His second stop was the office of Detective Alfred Marquez, a real police detective this time, not the fictional one Dean had invented as psychological pressure his enemies. Marquez was a 30-year veteran who specialized in domestic violence cases, and Dean's evidence package was about to make him very interested in the Mercado family. Detective Marquez, my name is Dean Harrington. I need to report multiple felonies including child abuse, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted murder. I have extensive documentation, including video evidence and recorded confessions. Dean laid out the entire case methodically, starting with the security footage of Nicholas's perfume attack and building through the conspiracy to steal his assets and murder both him and his son. The assassination attempt in the mountains was the final piece that transformed a domestic abuse case into something far more serious. Marquez reviewed the evidence with the expression of a man who had seen every form of human cruelty but could still be shocked by its casual application to children. Mr. Harrington, this is comprehensive. How long have you been gathering this material? 3 months, Dean replied honestly. Since I first suspected my son was being abused. And you didn't come to us sooner because? Dean met the detective's eyes steadily. Because I needed to be certain about the scope of the conspiracy, and because I needed to ensure my son's safety. People this organized and well-connected don't usually leave witnesses. Marquez nodded slowly. The attempted assassination in the mountains proved that Dean's caution had been justified. The Mercado family wasn't just abusive, they were professionally dangerous. We'll need you and your son to testify when this goes to trial, Marquez said. We'll be available, Dean promised, though he had no intention of waiting for the legal system to provide justice. The courts would handle the official punishment, but Dean's personal retribution was just beginning. By the time Dean returned home, word of the police investigation had reached the conspiracy. His phone was buzzing with panic calls from Cassandra, demanding to know what he'd told the authorities and threatening to make him regret his betrayal of the family. Dean let the calls go to voicemail while he prepared for the confrontation he knew was coming. Cassandra would arrive within the hour, probably accompanied by Louis and possibly her parents. They would be desperate, cornered, and dangerous, exactly the state Dean needed them in for the final phase of his operation. He sent Nicholas to stay with trusted neighbors, ostensibly for the boys' protection, but actually to ensure there would be no witnesses to what happened next. Then he settled in to wait, checking his weapons one final time. Cassandra arrived first, using her key to enter the house she still legally shared with Dean. She was disheveled and wild-eyed, clearly unraveling under the pressure of knowing that her entire world was about to collapse. "What did you tell them?" she screamed the moment she saw Dean sitting calmly in his living room chair. "What lies did you make up about our family?" Dean smiled, and Cassandra took an involuntary step backward. "I told them the truth, sweetheart. About Nicholas's abuse, about your affair with Louis, about the life insurance policy, about your parents' criminal history, about the 3 men you sent to kill us last night. You can't prove anything Cassandra said, but her voice lacked conviction. Dean pulled out his tablet and played a clip from the security footage. Cassandra spraying perfume directly into Nicholas's eyes while her mother laughed in the background. The sound of his son's screams filled the room, and Cassandra's face went white. I can prove everything, Dean said quietly. Every act of abuse, every criminal conspiracy, every murder plot. The only question now is whether you want to face the consequences with dignity or whether you want to make this harder on yourself. Lewis arrived 10 minutes later, followed shortly by Ramon and Beatrice. The entire conspiracy was now gathered in Dean's living room, facing the man they had underestimated so catastrophically. The terror in their eyes was everything Dean had hoped for, but it was just the beginning. The police have everything, Dean informed them conversationally. Videos, audio recordings, financial records, testimony from the surviving assassin you hired. There were no survivors, Ramon interrupted, then immediately realized his mistake. Dean's smile widened. Interesting that you would know that, Ramon. Almost like you were in communication with them during the operation. The trap was perfect. Ramon had just confessed to knowledge of the assassination attempt on recording equipment that Dean had hidden throughout the house. Every word they spoke was being documented for future use. What do you want? Beatrice asked, her composure finally cracking. Money? We can pay you whatever. I don't want your money, Dean interrupted. I want justice for my son, and I want you to understand what it feels like to be helpless while someone destroys everything you care about. He pulled out a small remote control and pressed a button. Throughout the house, screens activated, showing live feeds from security cameras positioned throughout the Mercado family properties. Their restaurants, their homes, their business offices, all under surveillance, all compromised. This is what the next phase looks like, Dean explained. Your businesses will fail when evidence of health code violations, tax evasion, and money laundering reaches the appropriate authorities. Your homes will be seized when the IRS discovers unreported income and offshore accounts. Your social standing will collapse when your criminal activities become public knowledge. He pressed another button, and the screens showed federal agents already moving into position around their properties. Dean had spent months building cases against them with multiple law enforcement agencies, creating a coordinated takedown that would destroy every aspect of their lives simultaneously. You can't do this, Lewis whispered. We have rights. You forfeited your rights when you torture a child, Dean replied. When you planned to murder him to cover up your crimes. When you hired killers to eliminate witnesses. The screen showed the first arrests beginning. Ramon's restaurant manager led away in handcuffs. Beatrice's accountant detained for questioning. Lewis's casino superiors reviewing evidence of embezzlement that Dean had fabricated, but that would take months to disprove. This is just the beginning, Dean continued. By tomorrow, your entire criminal enterprise will be dismantled. Your assets will be frozen, your associates will be arrested, and your futures will consist of prison cells and bankruptcy courts. Cassandra lunged toward Dean with a kitchen knife she grabbed from the counter, screaming incoherently about destroying his life the way he was destroying hers. But Dean had been expecting this reaction. Desperation made people predictable. He disarmed her easily, using techniques learned in close-quarters combat training. Cassandra found herself on the floor, the knife across the room, staring up at a man who could have killed her effortlessly but had chosen not to. The difference between us, Dean said as sirens approached in the distance, is that I protect children. You torture them. The police arrived to find the entire conspiracy in Dean's living room, surrounded by evidence of their crimes and confessing their guilt through panicked arguments with each other. Detective Marquez made the arrests personally, ensuring that each member of the conspiracy understood that their crimes against Nicholas had made this a personal mission for the entire police department. As they were led away in handcuffs, Dean felt something that had been missing since the night he discovered his son's abuse. Peace. Justice was being served, and the people who had hurt Nicholas would never be able to hurt anyone again. But Dean's revenge was far from complete. Prison would punish them for their crimes, but it wouldn't teach them what it felt like to be helpless and afraid. That lesson would come later, when they least expected it and when they had no power to defend themselves. Dean Harrington had never forgotten a wrong, and he never forgave those who hurt his family. The legal system would handle their official punishment, but their personal reckoning was just beginning. Chapter 7. The Systematic Destruction. 6 months after the arrests, Dean's enemies had learned that legal consequences were only the beginning of their punishment. From his command center in the basement, Dean orchestrated a campaign of psychological and financial warfare that slowly dismantled every aspect of their remaining lives. Ramon Mercado, once a respected businessman, found himself serving a 25-year sentence for conspiracy to commit murder, child abuse, and racketeering. But prison was only the start of his suffering. Dean had carefully researched the power dynamics within the Nevada State Penitentiary and ensured that Ramon's reputation preceded him. Word spread quickly through the prison population that Ramon was a child abuser who had tortured a 12-year-old boy. In the brutal hierarchy of prison justice, crimes against children marked a man for special attention from his fellow inmates. Ramon lasted 3 weeks in general population before requesting protective custody, but even that couldn't protect him from the systematic harassment Dean had arranged. Every letter Ramon sent was intercepted and scrutinized. Every phone call was monitored and recorded. Every commissary purchase was delayed or lost by guards who had been carefully informed about his crimes. The wealthy businessman who had once commanded respect and fear found himself reduced to a target of contempt and violence. Beatrice Moyer faced similar treatment at the women's correctional facility, but Dean's campaign against her was more sophisticated. He had discovered that her greatest fear was public humiliation, so he ensured that her crimes became the subject of extensive media coverage. Local news stations received anonymous tips about the wealthy socialite who tortured children, complete with security footage and court documents. Her carefully constructed social reputation crumbled within weeks. Former friends distanced themselves, charity organizations revoked her memberships, and the country club, where she'd held court for decades, banned her permanently. Even in prison, she received letters from former acquaintances expressing their disgust and disbelief. But Dean's masterpiece was his destruction of Cassandra's life. His ex-wife received a 15-year sentence for child abuse, conspiracy, and attempted murder, but her real punishment was psychological. Dean arranged for her to be housed with women who had lost children to abuse, creating a daily reminder of the harm she had caused. More cruelly, Dean ensured that Cassandra received regular updates about Nicholas's recovery and success. She learned that the boy she had tortured was thriving in therapy, excelling in school, and showing remarkable resilience in overcoming his trauma. Every achievement Nicholas made was a reminder of what Cassandra had tried to destroy and a testament to her failure as both a stepmother and a human being. Lewis Pratt, who received a 10-year sentence for his role in the conspiracy, faced the most creative punishment. Dean had discovered that Lewis's gambling addiction was compulsive and uncontrollable, so he arranged for the man to receive constant exposure to opportunities he couldn't access. Fake lottery tickets appeared in his cell with winning numbers that would have paid millions. Casino brochures arrived in his mail, advertising jackpots and promotions. Other inmates were coached to discuss gambling strategies and big wins, creating a constant psychological pressure that drove Lewis to attempt several unsuccessful escape attempts. But Dean's most sophisticated revenge was reserved for the criminal network that had enabled the conspiracy. He systematically destroyed the offshore banking system the Mercado family had used, working with federal agents to identify and prosecute dozens of money launderers, tax evaders, and criminal financiers. The ripple effect spread throughout Las Vegas's criminal underworld. Businesses that had seemed legitimate were exposed as fronts for illegal activities. Politicians who had taken bribes found themselves under investigation. The entire ecosystem of corruption that had protected families like the Mercados was dismantled piece by piece. Dean's campaign was so thorough that it became a case study for law enforcement agencies across the country. The methodical destruction of a criminal organization through legal means, combined with psychological warfare that broke the spirits of individual criminals, was unprecedented in its scope and effectiveness. But the most satisfying aspect of Dean's revenge was watching his enemies turn against each other as their situations became desperate. Cassandra blamed her parents for involving her in their crimes. Ramon blamed Lewis for being weak and unreliable. Beatrice blamed everyone except herself, maintaining her delusions of innocence, even as evidence of her cruelty was broadcast on national television. Their unity, which had once made them dangerous, became their weakness as desperation made them selfish. Each member of the conspiracy tried to reduce their own sentence by providing information about the others, creating a cascade of additional charges and extending their prison terms. Meanwhile, Nicholas continued to recover and thrive under Dean's protection. The boy had testified against his abusers with remarkable courage, his quiet dignity in the courtroom moving several jurors to tears. The scars on his face from the perfume attack would fade with time, but the inner strength he had developed would last forever. "Dad," Nicholas said one evening as they worked together in Dean's rebuilt garage, "do you think they understand now why what they did was wrong?" Dean considered the question carefully. Through his monitoring of their prison communications, he knew that his enemies were consumed with self-pity and rage rather than genuine remorse. They understood that they were being punished, but they still didn't accept responsibility for their crimes. "Understanding and accepting are different things," Dean replied. "They understand that their actions had consequences. Whether they accept that those consequences were deserved is between them and their consciences." Nicholas nodded thoughtfully. At 13, he was beginning to understand the complexities of justice and human nature. "Will you keep watching them?" "For as long as it takes," Dean promised. "Some people need constant supervision to ensure they don't hurt others. We're providing that supervision." The monitoring would continue indefinitely. Dean had built a surveillance network that would track his enemies for the rest of their lives, ensuring that they could never again operate in the shadows or find new victims to exploit. Every job application, every housing request, every attempt to rebuild their lives would be scrutinized and sabotaged if necessary. It was a level of control that some would consider excessive, but Dean's philosophy was simple. People who chose to hurt children forfeited their right to privacy, freedom, and second chances. His enemies would spend the rest of their lives paying for their crimes, and Dean would be there to collect every installment of that debt. The systematic destruction was complete, but Dean's revenge was not finished. The final phase would be the most personal and the most permanent. Chapter 8: The Final Judgment. 2 years after the trials, Dean received notification that Cassandra was eligible for parole. Her sentence had been reduced for good behavior and cooperation with ongoing investigations, a development that Dean had anticipated and prepared for extensively. The parole hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in Carson City, and Dean made sure to attend as the victim's guardian and primary witness. He brought Nicholas, now 14 and remarkably composed for someone who had endured such trauma at a young age. Cassandra looked older, worn down by prison life and the psychological pressure Dean had maintained throughout her incarceration. Her hair was graying, her face lined with stress, and her once confident demeanor had been replaced by nervous anxiety. The parole board consisted of 5 members who had reviewed extensive files on Cassandra's crimes and her behavior in prison. Dean had made sure they received detailed reports about her lack of genuine remorse, her attempts to minimize her role in Nicholas's abuse, and the ongoing danger she represented to children. "Ms. Morales," the board chairman began, "you've served 2 years of a 15-year sentence for child abuse, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted murder. Your application for parole claims that you've been rehabilitated and pose no further threat to society. Would you like to address the board?" Cassandra stood, her hands shaking slightly as she read from a prepared statement that had clearly been written by her lawyer. "I deeply regret my actions and the harm I caused to Nicholas. I participated in therapy, anger management, and parenting classes during my incarceration. I understand now that my behavior was wrong, and I'm committed to rebuilding my life as a productive member of society." The words were hollow, rehearsed, and completely unconvincing to anyone who knew Cassandra's true nature. Dean had recorded hundreds of hours of her phone calls from prison, documenting her continued attempts to blame others for her situation and her complete lack of empathy for Nicholas's suffering. "Mr. Harrington," the chairman continued, "as the victim's guardian, would you like to make a statement regarding Ms. Morales' request for parole?" Dean stood, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "Thank you, Chairman Rodriguez." I have several concerns about releasing Ms. Morales at this time. He pulled out a thick folder containing transcripts of Cassandra's recorded conversations, psychological evaluations that revealed her ongoing narcissistic tendencies, and evidence of her attempts to contact Nicholas through intermediaries despite court orders prohibiting such contact. Ms. Morales has demonstrated a pattern of manipulative behavior throughout her incarceration, Dean continued. She has attempted to circumvent no-contact orders, has shown no genuine remorse for her crimes, and continues to view herself as a victim rather than a perpetrator. He played a recording of Cassandra's most recent phone conversation, in which she described Nicholas as that little brat who ruined my life and expressed her intention to make them all pay once she was released. The effect on the parole board was immediate. The recorded evidence of Cassandra's ongoing hostility toward her victim and her lack of rehabilitation was damning. Her lawyer's face went pale as he realized that his client had been recorded admitting to continued criminal intent. Furthermore, Dean continued, Ms. Morales remains part of a criminal organization that specifically targeted children for abuse. Her parents, Ramon Mercado and Beatriz Moyer, are serving lengthy sentences for their roles in this conspiracy. Her former accomplice, Louis Pratt, has also shown no signs of genuine rehabilitation. Dean presented evidence that the conspiracy was still active even from prison, with the various members communicating through coded messages and attempting to coordinate their eventual revenge against Dean and Nicholas. The safety of my son must be the primary consideration in this decision, Dean concluded. Ms. Morales has demonstrated that she remains a clear and present danger to Nicholas specifically and to children generally. I respectfully request that her parole be denied and that she serve her full sentence. Nicholas then stood to address the board, his quiet dignity and obvious trauma creating a powerful contrast to Cassandra's hollow claims of rehabilitation. I still have nightmares about what she did to me, Nicholas said simply. The scars on my face will fade, but the memory of her spraying perfume in my eyes while her mother laughed will never go away. I don't think she's sorry for what she did. I think she's only sorry she got caught. The parole board deliberated for less than 30 minutes before returning with their decision. Cassandra's request for early release was denied unanimously, with the recommendation that she not be eligible for another parole hearing for at least 5 years. Cassandra's reaction was immediate and violent. She screamed at Dean across the courtroom, calling him a liar and a manipulator, threatening to destroy him and Nicholas when she eventually gained her freedom. Her outburst was recorded by court stenographers and added to her file as evidence of continued instability and dangerousness. As she was led away in handcuffs, Dean felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The legal system had worked exactly as he had planned, ensuring that his enemies would remain in prison for years to come. But the parole hearing was only the beginning of the final phase. Dean had spent 2 years preparing for Cassandra's eventual release, whenever it might occur, and his preparations went far beyond legal proceedings. That evening, Dean met with a group of men who shared his background in military special operations. They were now private security contractors, but they remembered their oath to protect the innocent and had volunteered their services for a unique long-term assignment. Cassandra Morales will eventually be released, Dean told the group. When that happens, she'll attempt to locate and harm my son. I need to ensure that she's under constant surveillance from the moment she leaves prison until she violates her parole conditions or commits a crime that puts her back inside permanently. The contractors nodded their understanding. They had all seen what criminals like Cassandra were capable of, and they shared Dean's philosophy that some threats required permanent monitoring. What about the others? Asked Dale Santana, a former Marine sniper who specialized in long-range surveillance. Ramon and Beatriz will serve at least 20 years, Dean replied. Louis might get out in 8 with good behavior. All of them will require monitoring, but Cassandra is the primary threat. The surveillance network Dean established was comprehensive and invisible. When his enemies were eventually released, they would find themselves living in a world where every move was watched, every communication monitored, and every attempt to harm innocent people immediately countered. It was a form of justice that the legal system couldn't provide, permanent, personal, and perfectly tailored to the specific threat each criminal represented. Dean's revenge was nearly complete, But he understood that true justice required vigilance for as long as his enemies drew breath. They had chosen to wage war against his family, and Dean would ensure that war continued until every threat was permanently neutralized. Some people deserved second chances. Others deserved constant supervision to ensure they never got the opportunity to hurt anyone again. Chapter 9. The Eternal Watch. 5 years later, Dean Harrington stood in the backyard of his new home, watching 18-year-old Nicholas graduate from high school as valedictorian. The scars on the young man's face had faded to thin white lines, barely visible unless someone looked closely. More importantly, the psychological scars had healed through years of therapy, love, and the absolute security that came from knowing his father would never let anyone hurt him again. Nicholas had grown into a remarkable young man, intelligent, compassionate, and possessed of an inner strength that impressed everyone who met him. He planned to study engineering at MIT in the fall, following in his father's technical footsteps while forging his own path forward. "Dad," Nicholas said as they cleaned up after the graduation party, "I got a letter from the parole board yesterday. They want me to provide a victim impact statement for Cassandra's next hearing." Dean nodded. He'd received the same notification and had already begun preparing his response. "What do you want to tell them?" Nicholas considered the question carefully, displaying the thoughtful nature that had served him well throughout his recovery. "I want to tell them that I'm not afraid of her anymore, that I've built a good life despite what she did to me. But I also want them to know that she's still dangerous to other children." "That's exactly what you should tell them," Dean agreed. What neither of them mentioned, but both understood, was that Cassandra's parole status was irrelevant to their actual security. Dean's surveillance network had evolved over 5 years into something that would have impressed intelligence agencies. Every member of the original conspiracy remained under constant observation, their communications monitored, their movements tracked, their associates investigated. Ramon Mercado had died in prison the previous year, killed by fellow inmates who had finally grown tired of his arrogance and entitlement. Dean had received notification of the death with cold satisfaction, one threat permanently eliminated. Beatrice Moyer remained in prison, her health declining rapidly as the stress of incarceration and social disgrace took its toll. Her projected release date was still 15 years away, assuming she survived that long. Lewis Pratt had been released on parole 8 months ago, but Dean's monitoring had immediately detected his return to gambling and criminal activity. Anonymous tips to his parole officer had resulted in Lewis being returned to prison within weeks, his parole revoked, and his sentence extended. Cassandra remained the primary threat, though her psychological profile suggested that years of imprisonment had broken her spirit more thoroughly than Dean had originally hoped. His recorded surveillance of her phone calls revealed a woman consumed with bitterness and rage, but lacking the energy or resources to act on her violent fantasies. Still, Dean maintained his vigilance. Some threats diminished with time, but others merely waited for the right opportunity to resurface. That evening, Dean received encrypted communication from Dale Santana, who is currently stationed near the women's correctional facility where Cassandra was serving her sentence. Target attempted to establish contact with known gang members, the message read. Intercepted communications suggest she's trying to arrange post-release assistance with locating your son. Recommend immediate intervention. Dean smiled grimly. Even after 5 years, Cassandra was still plotting revenge against Nicholas. Her inability to accept responsibility for her crimes and move forward with her life had made her predictable, and predictable enemies were vulnerable enemies. Within hours, prison authorities received anonymous tips about Cassandra's gang communications, supported by recorded evidence that Dean's surveillance team had gathered. Her parole eligibility was revoked, additional charges were filed, and her sentence was extended by another 10 years. The communication network she had tried to establish was systematically dismantled, with several gang members facing their own criminal charges for conspiracy and racketeering. Cassandra found herself in solitary confinement, her remaining connections to the outside world severed completely. Problem solved, Dean reported to Nicholas over dinner. Cassandra won't be eligible for parole again until she's 65, and her health records suggest she's unlikely to survive that long in prison. Nicholas nodded thoughtfully. Do you think she'll ever understand what she did wrong? Dean considered the question seriously. Through 5 years of surveillance, he had watched Cassandra's mental state deteriorate steadily. She remained consumed with self-pity and rage, unable to process the reality that her crimes had consequences or that her victims deserved justice. Some people are incapable of genuine remorse, Dean replied. They can learn to fear consequences, but they can't learn to feel empathy for their victims. Cassandra is one of those people. Then the monitoring will continue forever? Until the threat is permanently eliminated, yes. Nicholas accepted this reality with the same quiet courage he had shown throughout his ordeal. He understood that some forms of evil required eternal vigilance, and that his father's protection came with the price of constant awareness. As Nicholas prepared to leave for college, Dean reflected on the completeness of his victory. The conspiracy that had tortured his son was destroyed, its members dead, imprisoned, or broken beyond repair. The criminal network that had enabled their crimes was dismantled. The legal system had provided official justice, while Dean's personal campaign had provided personal satisfaction. Most importantly, Nicholas had not merely survived his trauma. He had thrived despite it, becoming a young man of remarkable character and achievement. The abusers who had tried to break him had only made him stronger. Dean's phone buzzed with another encrypted message, this one from a contact at MIT. Security arrangements confirmed. Target will be under discreet surveillance throughout his college years. Any attempts at contact or harassment will be immediately countered. The protective network would follow Nicholas to college and beyond, ensuring that he could live freely while remaining safe from any residual threats. Dean's revenge had evolved into something more sophisticated than simple punishment. It had become a comprehensive system for protecting the innocent while monitoring the guilty. That night, as Dean reviewed the latest surveillance reports from his basement command center, he felt the deep satisfaction that came from a mission accomplished. His enemies were defeated, his son was safe, and justice had been served with mathematical precision. Some fathers taught their children about forgiveness and second chances. Dean had taught Nicholas about loyalty, protection, and the reality that some people choose to be evil and must be treated accordingly. It was a harsh lesson, but it was an honest one. In a world where predators targeted the innocent, survival sometimes required becoming a predator yourself, one dedicated to hunting those who hunted others. Dean Harrington had never forgotten a wrong, never forgiven those who hurt his family, and never stopped protecting what mattered most. The war that began with perfume sprayed in a child's eyes had ended with the complete destruction of everyone who had participated in that cruelty. The watch would continue forever, ensuring that Nicholas could build his life in safety while his enemies served their sentences in fear. It was justice, perfectly balanced and eternally maintained. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.